Good vibrations.
So my guest today is Dr. Anne McCloskey, who is a GP, an activist, a former councillor in Derry, Northern Ireland, and a key driving force behind the new Freedom Alliance for the island of Ireland, which we are going to know all about. Welcome on, Anne.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's lovely to be here.
We'll get into different aspects of things you've been up to lately, but probably a good place to start would be to talk about the Freedom Alliance. If you just tell people what that's all about and what the initiative was behind forming it in the first place.
Yeah, well, as with so many groups across these islands, people who have realised that this so-called pandemic is not as is being described by government and media. Very many people, certainly in the early months, were on their own, sort of isolated, and really didn't know what to do with themselves. And gradually groups coalesced and formed around maybe individuals who were active in social media and began to operate together. There were, from the middle of the summer, I suppose, there were some protests, and again, people then reached out to one another and formed these loose alliances. But there was always a realization that, together we are stronger. And as happens in so many places, I mean, particularly I think maybe here in Ireland, although the same could be true of Scotland and England, our old, if you like, legacy politics, our complicated histories really, are another way in which people are divided. So we tried to look at a framework, and again, across the north of Ireland, there were maybe 15, 20 key people right across the entire political spectrum, from different religious backgrounds, from no religious background, from really very diverse range of people who tried to get together and look at this, what is a global emergency, in my opinion. This is not about health. This is about a complete reshaping of our way of life. So we tried to look and to see if we could put our old politics in the past. And then across the island of Ireland, I had been in touch with very many groups, again, similar community-based groups in different towns, who again were kind of reaching out to find if we could find a way of cooperating. The Freedom Alliance UK reached out to some of us in the north, trying to look and see how, again, could we affiliate to them. The historical United Irishmen, under the leadership of Theobald Wolfe Tone, was largely drawn from the Presbyterian, the Ulster Presbyterian population. And that tradition and history is still there. And it's something that we think fits today's model, even though that was 1798. But obviously there are people in Ireland who are very strongly unionist, who are royalists, who, just cannot see that as being, they cannot see, this island as an entity. And it has been challenging to keep these people together. But thankfully, it seems that, we've really managed to overcome that by saying that we will not look at constitutional politics. People can take their own personal views on the historical way that things have panned out here, as long as, and we have 4 principles, and these principles have to do with individual sovereignty, with freedom, with the right to life, with the right to own property, with the right to move freely, to associate, to travel. And the other important principle is that in any form of organisation going forward, that the rights of individuals, of families, of communities, and of nations supersede the rights of transnational corporations and supranational governmental organisations, because I think the last year has shown us very clearly that these organisations do not have the interests of the ordinary people at heart. So, yeah, that's kind of where we are. And our membership is growing. We have a website at www.freedom-alliance.org. We have an all island of Ireland membership. We are going to Dublin on St. Patrick's Day to take part in, again, a mental health families, supporting families day in Dublin city centre. And there will be a protest at the RTE, which is the South of Ireland's BBC, complaining about the media bias and the lack of accountability by the state broadcaster in again providing the people with information.
Yeah.
And then on Saturday the 20th, there is, as you may know, there's a World Freedom Day. There's I'm trying to remember what they call it. I think it's a Freedom Rally for Freedom Day, and in every country, or in very many countries, people are going to go out. This is the anniversary of the removal of our basic fundamental freedom and human rights. So on that anniversary, we're calling on people on the island of Ireland to come to a beach on the north coast, bring a picnic. There's plenty of room. It's a beach in Benone outside Limavady, and we expect people from all over the island to come there and I don't know whether the word is celebrate or mourn. It's supposed to celebrate solidarity, to mourn the removal of our freedoms, and to demand that this tyranny stops.
Yeah.
And again, there are, I think, 40 countries so far who are participating in that day of action, and I think it'll be useful,
And all based around the spring equinox as well. All these lockdowns came in around the time of the spring equinox last year. A lot of what's been done to us has been done according to ritualistic dates that are important in the occult calendar and such. And I've heard it suggested that St. Patrick's Day is actually timed to coincide with the spring equinox, that's the true spring equinox around the 16th, 17th of March, rather than the 21st, 22nd, as is generally assumed. Just
talking about the other sort of ritualistic thing is that St. Patrick's Day last year was cancelled. But also I think Easter is a very important date in people's psychological calendar. It's about resurrection and renewal, and that whole end of darkness.
The end of one cycle and the birth of another.
Absolutely. So I think between the equinox, St. Patrick's Day, and Easter, I mean, our for those of us who have faith and who sort of adhere to organised religion, that our churches and chapels would remain closed for a second Easter is unconscionable. It cannot be allowed to happen.
It really is. I mean, over here in the UK, we've had the latest roadmap out of lockdown restrictions given to us, the permissions that our overlords are granting us. And to me, it just seems straight mockery that pubs and restaurants are going to be able to serve outdoors again, and non-essential shops are going to be able to reopen on the 12th of April, which is the day that the kids go back to school after the Easter holidays. So for the whole 2-week period that families are going to be together over the Easter holidays, and for Easter weekend itself, all these things are closed. And then it reopens once everyone goes back to work and school. That won't have been by accident. That is psychological manipulation by design, as this whole thing has been all along. And who would have ever believed that they could have closed the pubs in Ireland on St. Patrick's Day last year without a revolution, and yet they achieved it.
It's quite phenomenal. I remember being at the meeting of Derry and Strabane District Council about a week or so before St. Patrick's Day last year, and at that time, so that would have been about the 10th of March, sometime around then, at that time we knew pretty much the case fatality of this alleged pandemic, and we knew that it was a fraction of 1%. And I remember at that meeting saying that it probably was about 0.3, so that's from the work of Stanford and people who were studying and very carefully studying the figures about what had happened in China and in Italy. So we knew, even at that early time before the first lockdown, that this was not what it was cracked up to be. And I argued at that meeting. The lone voice in the wilderness, as I tended to be in the council, Mark. I'm afraid I don't share very many of the ideas of my fellow politicians.
Well, that's why I got you on.
Oh, I know. There were so many votes. There were 40 councillors, and there were so many votes that were 39-1. But I don't take any of it back. And I can, as I say, I've always been, I suppose, contrary. I worked.
Say what's on your mind.
I worked for 30 years as a GP in an area of high socioeconomic deprivation. Our practice area had 60% child poverty. And I know the way that governments and the legacy media, I suppose, too, have absolutely failed ordinary people, ordinary good people. And the way that very many of the social problems and the despair that people unfortunately live their lives are because of bad governance. It's because of bad government, corruption, and theft of the stuff that rightly belongs to everybody. And as I say, our proclamation of the Irish Republic says that the land of Ireland belongs to the people of Ireland. And that really should be the guiding principle behind which states and governments operate. And unfortunately, as you know, that certainly isn't the case. I think the whole PPE scandal, for example, in England, and the fact that Boris Johnson, his government, his cabinet, without democratic accountability or scrutiny, without any parliamentary real debate, have decided to spend 37 billion pounds on track and trace because the World Health Organization thought it might be a good idea a year ago. And it's been, that whole system has been totally discredited. Now, I don't know. I'm not a great person about money, but 37 billion pounds. I mean, if you had that in pound coins, would it fit into a room? Would it fit into a hotel? Would it fit into a sports arena? You know, I don't even know what these numbers mean. Would it fund 10 hospitals? Or I don't know. But nobody knows. These numbers are just silly. But this vast amount of our children's money, our children's legacy, state taxpayers' resources are being spent, in a way that is absolute. It's insanity, and it has to stop.
Well, in previous generations, Boris Johnson and his entire cabinet of traitors would have been dragged out into a public place by citizens with pitchforks and lynched from the nearest available trees. And we were having a chat yesterday before this show about if the controllers had tried to pull this scamdemic 30 or 40 years ago, how different the public reaction might have been, with specific reference to Ireland as well. So I was saying to you, rightly or wrongly, you had the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and if they tried to pull this scam at the time that all those troubles were going on, I like to think that fighting spirit, people believing in a cause passionately, strongly, would have been channeled into a huge amount of public resistance and pushback to the tyranny. And yet here we are 3 or 4 decades on, and all that fighting spirit just seems to have been systematically programmed out of humanity, and particularly men. I've got on my hobby horse a few times on previous shows asking, where have all the real men gone? Because men who are supposed to be stepping into that sacred masculine and are supposed to be the defenders of their communities against threats to the safety of everyone are just meekly, blindly complying with their own enslavement. And I just wonder where that fighting spirit has gone. It just seems to have disappeared out of people in Ireland as much as anywhere else. I mean, would you agree with that?
It's a complicated one. I think, well, first of all, don't forget that we have never, ever been told before that we're going to kill people by resisting, by peaceful protest. I mean, that whole narrative is something that is, it's incredible that people are being blamed, that they're being told that they're biohazards, that their children are being told that they're a health threat to their parents and grandparents, and grandparents have been told that by seeing their families, they put their own lives at risk. So this vile lie, this psychological manipulation of people's most sacred relationships, it is a new thing. With regard to, I mean, I remember being on marches. I mean, after Bloody Sunday in Derry, there were annual marches for decades, and we regularly had 20,000 people on the streets every year, year after year, buses from all over the land. So that happened. But I think, you know, there are very many people who see what's going on. Men don't forget. I mean, I don't know if you saw that protest in London after that poor woman was you know, lost her life, Sarah Everard. And it wasn't a protest. It wasn't a vigil it was about toxic masculinity, this new nonsense that the feminist movement have so that men, I think, are in an invidious position at the moment that, you know, that this, they're, you know, again, this has never happened before, that we see these new divisions across our society, and this whole nonsense that you know, that these extreme groups, extreme Marxist groups, which are so small in number, but are so vocal, so well funded, and so well organized. And again, ordinary people, men and women, need to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, no, enough is enough. It's over.
That's right. And this vigil that we had over the weekend in London shows all the signs of being another orchestrated psy-op for the express purpose of demonizing men and providing an excuse to kind of subliminally frame men in the minds of people that don't engage in critical thought as all being closet rapists and murderers that go on the rampage and start marauding after 6 p.m. unless they're told to stay indoors. It comes straight out of the social engineering handbook out of the Tavistock Institute and all these other organisations that specialise in these things.
I hear one of the Green MPs. How are these people allowed out to roam the streets? Never mind get elected to Parliament. Thought that the lockups weren't bad enough, that men should have a special curfew at 6 o'clock. What sort
That's
of?
right. If that ever happens, I'm just going to state that I identify as a female now, because you know, because I can play that game too. Yeah, because I can embrace all this transgender agenda stuff and say, oh, well, I'm not a man, you see. I might look like a man, but I identify as a woman. Therefore, I've got a right to be out on the street after 6 p.m. So, you know, we could turn that one to our advantage.
That would be a wonderful response. Yeah. I mean, you think things can't get any crazier, and then they do. You know, I don't think they're going to impose a curfew on men, but you couldn't be sure. The world has got so insane.
It really has. I don't think they're going to go there with that one. I think it's just putting the frighteners on people. It's more fear-based propaganda. And it's just making the whole sorry scam just seem so utterly absurd and ridiculous. It almost feels like they're going to extremes to make it as ridiculous as possible. Sometimes it even feels to me like they're trying to cause people to wake up, to force them to wake up. You know, maybe they're trying to incite rebellion, so they've got a chance to go full communist on everyone. I don't know what the plan is. But anyway, so the Freedom Alliance, that's affiliated to the World Freedom Alliance, which is headed by Dolores Cahill, correct?
Yes. And we're working in association with the Freedom Alliance in England, Scotland and Wales. So we have the Freedom Alliance on the island of Ireland, which includes the two jurisdictions which de facto exist here. We have, I mean, whether we like it or not, we have two governments, two legal systems, two educational systems, two currencies, two different relationships with the EU. You know, so we're starting from where we are, but the Freedom Alliance is going to try and straddle all of that and unite people who are the important things. You know, territorial claims are irrelevant. We need to get people who respect their freedom to stand together. And it's working. It's happening. It's happening on St. Patrick's Day, and it's happening on Saturday the 20th. And I'm very excited about it. There's a lot of positive pushback. I think now a year on, when nothing has changed. I mean, if lockups work, how come we're still locked up? And
That's
you
right.
look at the absolutely monumental decisions that are being made, globally and internationally, about that are going to affect ordinary people. And it's all done under cover of just the lack of scrutiny. Oh, it's about the Roni. We can't have a meeting about that. We can't have a vote about it. We can't assemble together and debate it because, this dreadful health threat. And as I say, we know that across the planet, in no country was there a significant increase in all-cause mortality in this so-called pandemic. I think Ireland grew her population by a couple of percent in the year 2020. So the statistics are in. So, the emperor has no clothes. He doesn't even have a fig leaf. It's over.
If lockdowns and masks work, why are we still doing them? If lockdowns and masks don't work, why are we still doing them? You can't have it both ways.
You can't have it both ways. And I mean, I'm trying, Mark, to do this. At the beginning, I was sort of going, take your nappy off your face and, this sort of stuff. And I that was a mistake and it was wrong. I think we need to try and appreciate that people are coming at this at different speeds. And funny, I was talking to a man last night and he was talking about the people who were betrayed most are the people who did comply, who did, really change their lives and their relationships fundamentally. And when they understand, there's going to be a huge psychological trauma for people who still believe that their government have integrity, who still believe that their media have some sort of honor. And so I think it's important to try, rather than challenging people, to try and bring them along at whatever pace that they can come. And that's difficult sometimes. But, for example, if anybody wants to wear a mask at the protest on Saturday, they're very welcome to do so. Do you know what I mean? It's to try and make this a space where people can wake up at their own speed.
As long as they don't try and coerce others to wear one against their will.
Absolutely. And that's the difference. If a vaccine, you believe that a vaccine will protect you and you're aware of the risks, then I have no problem with you having a vaccine, But I mean, brings us on to the whole thing about the principles of informed consent. The Montgomery principles sort of reset the whole paradigm for medical and doctors in 2015. And the informed consent means that every side effect which would be considered significant, I think is the word that's used, must be discussed. And adverse outcomes, even where unusual, should be discussed with the patient before any medical or surgical procedure. So that cannot happen in this current injection campaign because we do not know. These are experimental medications. They have no license. They are not approved. They have an emergency license where no emergency exists. And there are serious theoretical reasons to believe that they may do immense harm, not just immediately, but, down the line. For example, these RNA vaccines have never, ever, ever been used in humans before, and that they're being rolled out to millions of people while still undergoing clinical trials is, to my mind, this needs Nuremberg all over again. It's an absolute travesty of any doctor's ethical code of conduct, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop. We need to challenge. So we're trying here to provide, our website is to provide people with the tools to politely, when they get their letter, write to whoever signed that letter and say, how can I give informed consent? And I will hold you personally responsible for any adverse outcome that should occur. We need to take the power back to people and tell them no.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about your site, the fact that you cover sovereignty and natural rights and freedoms. You go beyond just COVID legislation to embrace these eternal principles. So as a practicing GP then, which you still are, although I gather you've run into a bit of flack for your viewpoints on things.
To be fair, there was an organised and orchestrated and very public online campaign where people were posting under anonymous Facebook sites. They were posting, let's get together, let's take her down, right to the GMC every day. And the GMC, to give them their dues, they are required to respond, and they wrote to me and I wrote back to them, and they, where this is there's no fitness to practice issue here. We still, thankfully, I don't know how long it's going to last, but as doctors, we are allowed to express our considered opinions, as long as it doesn't interfere with our patient care. And I am absolutely sure that I am protecting patients and vulnerable people. And from the very beginning of this, I have been bringing people in, examining them, talking to them face to face. For example, I saw a child who almost died of undiagnosed diabetes, who had been in contact with their own medical practice 3 or 4 times by telephone, but because nobody looked at him and checked his blood sugar. So his mother phoned the out of hours and said, I'm just worried about him tonight. And there was nothing very specific, but if a mother says to me, I'm worried about a 15-year-old boy, I'm going to look at him. And his blood sugar was 35, I think, and he was in pre-diabetic coma, and he required to be transferred to intensive care in Belfast. And, these things are happening because of the lockups. And we know that there is a significant increase in people dying at home in a younger demographic who are not COVID deaths, people who are dying of untreated heart disease and strokes. And the lockups are likely to cause somewhere between 200,000 and 500,000 excess deaths in the coming years because of undiagnosed cancers. We know from the stats that we're just not picking up these things early when they're able to be treated. So that, that this is, and the General Medical Council, you're allowed to argue these things. And indeed, publications like the British Medical Journal, to be fair to them, have been looking at the issue of where this has taken us in terms of the rest of the health service. And I actually I sent them a wee review thing on the British Medical Journal there a couple of weeks ago had it on its front cover, sort of serried rows of mournful candles, and a headline which says 100,000 deaths. Where did we go wrong? And to be fair, they published a review article, which I wrote on that article, saying, well, I'll tell you where we went wrong. We counted everything. We counted over 2 respiratory seasons. We counted every death with a positive PCR test, and also, within 28 days of a positive PCR test. And we counted every death where the final event was shortness of breath, cough, and fever. This is the final common pathway whereby people with every underlying condition die. If you have heart failure, if you have cancer, these are the things that happen in people's last days and hours. So this figure is simply a construct, a psychological tool to push people into submission, and it's a lie. And it needs called out. When the British Medical Association prints things which are manifestly misleading. And here locally, we've a couple of, I think they're in nearly every town now, there's a couple of go-to media rock star doctors. They're saying things which are simply untrue. As my father would have said, a terminological inexactitude. About the out of hours is like a war zone. So sorry, no, I'm working there. It's ominously quiet, and people ring up looking for help, and the first thing they do is apologize and say, I'm so sorry, doctor. I know you are so busy. And I'm going, no, we are not.
Why would those doctors be saying that? Are they being financially incentivized to prop up the lie by making these statements?
If they are, Mark, I'll be the last person to hear it, assure me. Let me assure you. No, I don't know. I think either they are not very bright and not able to look beyond their own sort of self-fulfilling, that sort of roundabout that goes on, that you actually believe your own narrative, and actually, either that, it's possible that there are, and just sometimes people get a bit full of themselves, and and the other thing then is that it's desperately difficult to admit that you've been wrong, and I get that too, and that's why. I know in the South there were a group of people talking about trying to get lateral flow tests used, these quicker diagnostic tests. And I get that. I don't agree with any mass testing for a threat which is not a health threat to the general population. I think that perpetuates a myth which needs rooted out and thrown away. But I get it that it at least gives governments and the medical profession and that a sort of a fig leaf to cover the mistakes that they've made, and it may give them a way out, because I would love to be wrong in all of this, but I don't think I am. I would dearly love to be called that idiot conspiracy theorist. I would love if that was true.
So many things I'd like to be wrong about as well.
Totally.
Statements I've made. Yeah. Do you accept that COVID is real then, and not just the flu or the common cold rebranded?
I don't know. I am aware that I wrote a Freedom of Information request to the regional virology lab asking, had it been sequenced, had it been reproduced, and had that sequence been shown to cause the symptoms which we've now know as COVID-19. The Cox postulates, had they been fulfilled? And I got a monosyllabic answer. So for had it been sequenced, they said yes, no further information. And, had it been shown to cause this, again, yes, but no qualification. Now, I know that somebody has offered a massive sum of money for whoever can sequence this. And I don't believe that prize has been collected yet.
It still hasn't, no.
It still hasn't, yeah. I know that Dolores Cahill's group have been looking at, the PCR tests, we don't have to go into this again, but they are absolutely useless. And again, from my Freedom of Information request to the trusts here in the north of Ireland, they're still counting 40 cycles as a positive result. So that this case-demic, this nonsense of you're a case, if you're perfectly well, and have no symptoms whatsoever and are incapable of spreading disease, but you must stay at home for 2 weeks, all of that nonsense. The whole thing around that in where there is low population infectivity, that these things are almost 100% false positives when they run at these high amplification cycles. That trusts and labs are still getting away with this is quite incredible. These private Serco and the like of that, using our money, which we need for hospitals, for roads, or benefits for people, for looking after people with disabilities. This is real money. That is literally, it's these people must be held accountable for that. It's horrific.
It really is. And over a year now, they've kept this scam going. It's just incredible that they've been able to keep it alive for this long. There's got to be huge numbers of doctors around the world who know that COVID is a massive scam and a massive racket, but they're keeping quiet for the sake of their careers because they don't want to derail their own personal situations. And just imagine the difference it would make to the experiences of all humanity if all these doctors would come together in solidarity. I know this is something you're trying to achieve through your movement there, but just imagine all these doctors all around the world that know something is wrong with all of this, all supporting each other and all actually being prepared to sacrifice their personal financial well-being for the greater good of all humanity, standing shoulder to shoulder with each other. They could sink this entire scamdemic overnight if they would come together in doing that. But I'm not holding my breath.
No, I mean, the Great Barrington Declaration, which I'm sure your listeners will be very well aware of. I think there's something like there's tens of thousands of medical professionals and scientists and professors that have signed this, and they've managed to kind of dismiss this as some sort of a lunatic fringe. It's appalling that people with the standing of Sunitra Gupta and Bhattacharya, and these people who have served for decades and know these subjects inside out. I mean, the people on SAGE, as far as I can gather, they're sociologists, they're psychologists, they're behavioural manipulators, and they are poor data scientists who work on models. But these other people who are virologists, immunologists, epidemiologists, and practicing physicians, were just called nuts. It was taken down from the search engines. You have to actually go on their website to sign that. You can't get it on Facebook or Google or any of these things whereby, and the mainstream media absolutely ignored it unless they were dissonant. So, solidarity, and I think people are making that assessment. They're going, what is the point? Even if I stand up and lose my job, and we've seen some very honourable doctors in Ireland. I'm thinking of Dr. Pat Morrissey, Marcus de Bruin, Dr. Waters, who have been calling this out from the start, and they've all lost paid positions. They have been humiliated and scorned and ridiculed. So it's not an easy decision. And as I say, that critical mass isn't there yet. But I live in hope. I'm a hopeful character.
It's just so frustrating to reflect that is a dynamic that could put this whole thing to bed very, very quickly. And if doctors won't come together for the reasons you've just outlined there, then where does that leave us? And where does any hope lie in getting the job done?
Well, I think
alternative means
hope will come in that with every day, there's more and more evidence coming to the surface, that this was a monumental, the greatest lie that has ever been perpetrated on poor suffering humanity. And, eventually, I think people will realize. I mean, I don't know that, I presume you're aware of is it Geert van den Bosch, who worked for Gavi and who worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and who has now, come out and said he's worried about this vaccination program. And now I've heard that he may be a false flag, he may be, an insider, and there's so much smoke and mirrors around this that it's quite difficult to understand what's going on. But what he was saying is that these partially effective vaccines are indeed like antibiotic resistance, where you don't finish the course or where it's the wrong antibiotic and it's only partially effective, that we are breeding, that sort of a vaccine resistance and that these escape strains. And it's strange that the first of these so-called new variants came from countries where the vaccine trials were held, Brazil, South Africa, and the UK, so that these were these breakaway things, and certainly for the first time ever, I'd been a bit scared going, by vaccinating millions and millions, they want to vaccinate 7.8 billion people across the planet for something which
Bill Gates does for sure,
0.003% of the population have succumbed to this. Most of them people who were in the last months of their life in any case. What is going on? Where is the logic to this? And but by injecting these things, they are almost certainly doing untold harm to people's health. But also that if what this expert immunologist and vaccinologist is saying, the vaccinated people may very well pose a significant health threat to those of us who choose to trust our beautiful God-given immune system. I've no doubt, Mark, this is a spiritual battle. This is
Sure.
the head of this serpent is not human. This is a monumental battle between good and evil. And whatever tools people can bring to that table, I think it's important that we try and get solidarity and get people confident and helping one another. And I do think I have great faith in human nature, and it's slow. I agree, and our young people seem to be reticent to stand up and that, but I think the human spirit is a force to be reckoned with.
Yep.
So yeah, let's hope.
I'd be inclined to agree with you. And it is hard to imagine how this scamdemic can be kept going forever without being revealed. There's so much information out there now. It really is info wars, to borrow that phrase from Alex Jones. It's the mainstream media's fear-based mind control propaganda versus truthful information backed up with evidence and data, and they're doing battle with each other. But it's very hard to imagine that the truth won't come out in the end. I don't know how long that will take, but I can just envision a point in the future where people are looking back at the world the way it was in 2020, 2021, the great COVID scam, and they're going, oh my God, how did they get away with it for so long? How did people fall for it when it's so obvious now? There's got to come a point where it all comes out. I think the psychopathic architects of this narrative have supremely overreached in their arrogance and their hubris, and they've betrayed themselves. They've made it so obvious and so clear to anyone with a functioning brain capable of critical thought that there's a political agenda here, and it's way more than any virus. It's so obvious now, it can't be denied. Or if you do deny it, then you're in a very heavy state of cognitive dissonance.
No hope.
or your salary depends on you not understanding it.
Yeah, well, there's certainly both of those things are going on. Yeah, and I mean, we know that, first of all, spoiler alert here, disclaimer, I know nothing about money. I go to the accountant every year, and he talks to me about tax and stuff, and then he'll say, "And you're not listening, are you?" And I go, "No, chat away. Just tell me where to sign." I know nothing about how it works, but I know that the global economy is in heavy trouble, and my concern is that the longer we keep this going, the more of the global poor and marginalised in our own societies are going to die. Don't forget, poverty kills. This is not some sort of... I laugh at all these so-called leftists, people before profit and Sinn Féin and people like that, who think this is a great idea to push people to dismantle an economy, because people are more important than money. That narrative is nonsense. So that, and we need to plan for how we're going to rescue the people who are going to be damaged most by this. And, certainly that's a conversation which needs to happen. And it probably won't happen in I think politics as we know them currently is over. If parliamentary democracy can do this to its own people, then it's a system we can have no respect for. So I don't know. I have no idea how to sort that. It's far too big for me. But, certainly we need a system of government whereby people who make decisions cannot have any interest in the outcome of those decisions. No personal, financial, family, that level of scrutiny and accountability and disconnect between profit and decisions. I think that's really important. But the whole economic fallout is yet to be seen, and it's been buffered by, printing money which doesn't exist. And as I keep saying, this does not belong to any government. This belongs to our human family. It belongs to our children and our grandchildren. And this whole thing is, and you look at the people who are most active in this, they're all people who have a stake in the future, people with families, people, the most of the others are, the people who have no children and who are, like I look at for example, the Taoiseach in Ireland, Leo Varadkar, he's a gay man. He he doesn't have family that are going to suffer from this. And he's an atheist. His only interest is in today, is in his ratings and his money and his investments. And there's so many like that who are driving this whole narrative globally. The people who are standing with us, generally speaking, are people who care and deeply care about what happens to their children and grandchildren. Certainly that's my motivating factor. I'm going to go where this takes me. I'm 63 years of age. I will spend cheerfully the rest of my life in jail if that's what it takes. And I'm not joking. I'm not, I don't think this is going to happen. But I don't care about me. I will give everything I have. I don't care. And there's nothing I need except for food. There's nothing that this world can offer me that I really care about. But I want this to change for my patients, the people of my town, my family first, and then the people in my community, people in my town, nation. These are the things that get me up in the morning.
Prior to last year, I used to hear accounts of people saying that they were prepared to die for their cause. They were prepared to die for what they believed in. And prior to 2020, I could never really understand that. I could never understand what would motivate somebody to be prepared to lose their life over something they believe in so strongly. But I understand it now. Last year's experience made me realize that if you don't have freedom, you have nothing. Your life is not worth living. And, what we're undergoing now is existing. It can't be called living because we're not free to express ourselves fully the way humans are meant to in creation. So I absolutely get why someone would die for a cause now. And as far as I'm concerned, what we're all going through now, putting down this tyranny, if that's not worth laying down your life for, if it comes to it, for the sake of the freedoms of future generations, then what else could be? How much knowledge among doctors do you feel there is of the astronomical influence and sway that Bill Gates holds over the big pharma industry? Do you think most doctors would be aware of that?
Almost none. These people listen to the BBC. I don't think they read newspapers very much. They watch Netflix. They do their work, and don't forget. And this, Mark, this has been a hugely steep learning curve for me. I worked in orthodox medicine, I suppose, for a career I qualified on the 18th of June, 1981. So the 18th of June this year will be my 40th anniversary as a doctor. I trained in an institution, which now, and in the 80s it wasn't as bad as it is now, but most medical schools now are owned by big pharma. They're owned by, and funded, as are most universities, funded by these not tax-exempt foundations. And if you do not toe the line, you will not do well. I have family members who are professors in universities and who tell me quite openly that they will fail people, for example, if they question the climate narrative. So that for young people, that whole, the education system has dumbed down people's critical thinking skills, and I think a lot of the, there isn't the rebelliousness, I suppose, that I was brought up with in my generation. I think it's true to say, obviously my household were rebels, but I think that has been educated out of people. And I tend to find that the less formal education you have, for a lot of people, it seems to be that the better they are at seeing objectively what's happening. So it's interesting, and that's why, in a way, I have great hope, because I do think that ordinary people will wake up and will take the professors with them, screaming, kicking and screaming. I mean, the amount of money that's going into places like in Imperial College London, and you're talking tens of millions, and even the World Health Organization is funded by people who have an agenda. And I think that's very, very frightening. And, it needs to stop. People, who money cannot buy knowledge and education and policy outcomes, it just shouldn't happen. This goes very deep, and it now I'm hoping this will be a wake-up call for humanity to say no. Education is for everybody, and it shouldn't be driven by maybe 10, 12 people across the planet. That in every university the same sort of constructs are being taught without any ability to challenge them. And that's why I think this freedom of speech stuff that's coming out now from some of the colleges, and the whole resistance to deplatforming, and that is very, very interesting, very hopeful. And I do think that the tide will turn. I think it's reached the nadir, and people will hopefully. And I'm not saying hopefully. I'm optimistic. I don't think you and me are going to have to die for this. I think with what we're doing in our own small way may bring some people with us.
And I hope we're not doing a show in March 2022 and finding ourselves no further forward and bemoaning the fact that people still haven't woken up to this scam. But I don't think it's going to be dragged out that far myself.
This stops when we stop it. The old phrase, we are the many, they are the few. People need to withdraw their consent. Take your mask off.
That's right.
Take it off. That's a symbol of non-compliance. And again, about the vaccines, people need to be, this is my urgent message, is that until we have robust, first of all, I don't think they're necessary. I've been saying this all the time. Maybe among the very old people, but then they haven't done well. We know that nursing home deaths have rocketed since the introduction of the injections. But people need to inform themselves and ask the people who are putting them under pressure to take these things for any reason, will they be or happy to be held personally accountable in law for any adverse effects or harms? And that's a very powerful statement. We still own our bodies, and it's important that people exert their human rights and dignity and autonomy, and insist that we will not be coerced into doing things with very, very serious consequences. So that's, I suppose, my important message.
And you mentioned a while back there that doctors like to get home and watch Netflix after they've logged off from their shift and just relax and stuff, and they're just like ordinary people in that regard. So then doctors must like doing normal stuff with their families, just like everyone else. They must like going out to restaurants. Maybe they like going to the cinema or going to a bowling alley or going to a activity center or something. And they themselves have been restricted from being able to do these things with their families because of this massive scam. And it's only continued because they've been cooperating with the PCR tests, which are completely unreliable, the idea of lockdowns and now vaccines and masks and all this, because they've been helping to prop up the official agenda. Again, we're just going back to one of my previous comments about how if they would only come together and just blow this scam out of the water, then it would all be over for everyone, and they themselves would have better family lives just like us, because the lockdowns would no longer be justified. But that's just me getting on my soapbox and having a bit of a rant. So as a doctor, do you feel there is any efficacy or validity to vaccines at all? Not the COVID vaccine specifically, but the whole idea of vaccines.
Again, Mark, I was sort of started talking about this, and then as I do, I jump from one subject to another. I've had a hugely steep learning curve really over the past couple of years. I have a brother who's been looking very deeply into these things, our Mickey. And he has been talking to me, and warning me that something big was going to happen. Didn't know when. And when this started, he said to me, you watch what's going to happen. Now you watch. And this was way back, maybe December, January time. And I watched. And as I say, it's been I'm sort of doing research now between 6 and 8 hours a day and the rest of it. And yeah, I'm not convinced vaccinations. I mean, we know that the big public health things that help are clean water, nutrition, sanitation. These are the things that really make a difference. And it strikes me that if people wanted to save lives in the global poor, they would not offer them contraception, abortion, and vaccines. They would give them roads, infrastructure, hospitals, a blood transfusion service, maternal health care, sanitation, clean water. These are the things that save lives. Vaccines possibly tinker about with the edges, and there seems to be solid evidence that in some cases they do cause harm. I'm talking about the incidence of autism. My daughter teaches in the local school here, and there's 2 or 3 children with autism in every class. Now, I went to a school with 1,000 pupils in it, and it was unheard of. It just wasn't a thing back in the 70s. And I'm sure there were children with profound and complex needs in these. They were in them days. They were sort of separate schools. Nothing like the numbers. Nothing like the numbers. I just haven't really had time to go into all of that, but it certainly is a debate which needs to happen, and it needs to happen on the media. It needs to happen. We need to give people who know about these things. I mean, Robert Kennedy Jr., for example, this is a totally credible source, and yet he's been, his public platforms have been withdrawn, and he's vilified, and these are huge subjects. We saw that, and again, I'm sorry, her name escapes me, that woman in America who was very adamant. She says, I'm not suicidal. And her life ended in very strange circumstances. So that these, when truth and when discussion is suppressed, you nearly always have to look and say, well, there's something, we're over the target here, there's something not right, when you're not allowed to talk about it. So I just think nothing should be taboo. Everything, there should be no such thing as you're not allowed to talk about that. And unfortunately, that's very much the way this whole thing has spun out. Don't look, There's nothing to see there. Obey the rules. Even the people who make the decisions, you're right, have been constrained by these, the restrictions on their lives also. I find it difficult to understand. So again, we're back to the thing, do they actually not know? In which case, it frightens me to think that they're in charge of people's health and well-being. Or are they afraid for their lives and careers? In which cases, the doctor-patient relationship is under threat. Because if your doctor will do things which are not right to protect his career, how can you possibly trust him?
That's right. And he's taken a Hippocratic oath as well.
Yes. And I have a lot of friends in the nursing profession, and actually nurses now are coalescing, and this is wonderful to see. Because what they're saying is if they look at their ethical codes of conduct, they're being asked, I have a friend who's a nurse, and she talks to me every day. They're being asked to implement things which take the heart from them, take people who are dying and pull the person who shared their bed for 50 years, pull them away from them and put them out of the hospital ward, and them crying and these are things no nurse should ever have to do. I remember back in the day, I worked in the geriatric unit in the local hospital, and there was a woman, and her husband was in there. He had a stroke, and she used to come in at visiting hour, and she used to get in at visiting hour, and she used to climb on the bed, on top of the bed, close beside him, put her arms around him, and they lay like that for an hour. I don't even think they talked that much. That was visiting hour. And now it's you can put a plastic bag over your hands and do a Zoom call, and it's barbarity. And nurses are being asked to implement that. And again, nurses, thank God, and if there are any nurses listening, talk to your colleagues and use your own professional code of ethics against the people who are making you behave like this, your health trusts and your managers. That they cannot force you to do things which are against your conscience, against your professional standards. Likewise, teachers, you need to go get together and look the way that we're doing it here. And I know, again, with some people in Freedom Alliance who've been running very, very good campaigns against, for example, the requirement for children to wear masks in school, and the requirement for in the month of December that they keep the windows open. I mean, it's just nonsense. But what they are doing is, if you look at your school's mission statement, which will be full of all these fluffy stuff about, increasing their physical, social, psychological, and emotional health and well-being, and say, right, can you show that these things that you're making these children do will not work against that in any way, that they will not, these are your standards. Will you, first of all, give me evidence that these things will help, and your risk assessment, which says that they won't do harm. And they haven't got it.
It's been my experience that they just ignore that. They've not done risk assessments, and they just don't even want to engage in a conversation about it.
But if you hold the person who makes the decisions, and usually the head teacher, hold him or her personally responsible for harm, and tell them that you will, act legally to, ensure that if should harm occur, I think if enough people do that, these people will fold.
Yep.
These are practical steps that everybody can use to protect. I mean, that our precious children are not being allowed to live their young lives freedom is, to me, the most painful part of all of it.
And even to see the bottom half of the faces of their friends.
Dreadful. I when I see babies, they generally speaking don't wear masks, although I've seen that as well. I always, engage with them and smile at them. And their wee faces are quite startled. They've never seen a full face before. I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing to our children?
It's just
in
evil,
the name of
straight evil.
Evil. You got it. You got it.
It is. It's straight evil. I believe you have connections through your Freedom Alliance to Rainer Fulmich and the legal case that he's bringing.
World Freedom Alliance, and this is a sort of a global brand, so that the associations are quite loose. But I'm hopeful that these connections will be made. I know that Dolores Cahill, she's president of the World Freedom Alliance, and we have a Freedom Alliance in Germany and in Denmark and in France and Canada. This will be, and as I say, a global movement against globalism. A people-powered movement against global tyranny and totalitarianism. I think it's a very exciting concept. But it needs people. It needs people to withdraw their consent from what is happening. And I know, for example, in the south of Ireland, they have a written constitution, which we in the north don't have, and in the UK you don't have. And if 51% of people deregister their vote, the government falls and the constitution falls, and you start all over again with a clean sheet and you write a new constitution. So these are things which give me hope that we need information, and we need to. I think that's why I think it's important. On St. Patrick's Day, I'm going to speak at the National Broadcasting Station. I think people, certainly in the BBC, do not pay your licence. Do not. There are 2 television screens in this house. They haven't been on for a year. And if somebody comes to collect a licence, I'm not letting them into the house, obviously, but what I will say is I'll put them out the front and you can take them with you. I will never, ever subscribe to their lies again. And people need to understand that this is how you change things. The BBC get £4 billion of public money every year to treat the public with absolute disdain. And it has to stop.
That's right.
Enough is enough.
Yep.
So people like you, Mark, as I say, are flying the flag on alternative media. And hopefully, please God, that'll grow. And again, we need to make our own channels separate and try and get to just simply withdraw from that system.
It is InfoWars, as I said, and truth wages war on all lies and deception. So the lies always crumble in the end. It might take a very long time, but the truth always trumps deception in the end. So we start to wrap it up there, Anne. Just remind people where they can go to find the Freedom Alliance online, and what sort of input are you looking from listeners? How can they get involved and be a part of things in terms of what you're doing there? Well,
we have a website called, it's www.freedom-alliance.org. And if you go on there and subscribe, you'll get a weekly email. You'll have access to, the thing isn't fully populated yet, and we're trying to make sure we do it properly. You'll have access to resources which help you in your dealings with schools, with health systems, with governments, with law enforcement agencies. Not law enforcement agencies. Obviously, state repression, I think, is probably a better word at the moment. but that you'll get tools that'll give you the confidence to be able to challenge this with, and protect yourself at the same time. It's all very well talking about dying for a cause. We don't want any martyrs. We want to do this. We want to empower people to keep themselves safe.
Yeah, we prefer not to have to, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We like, with your integrity intact, that you can challenge this and be successful in doing so. If enough people do it, they can't take us all to court. They can't take us all to jail. And this is tyranny, and it's illegal. These are not laws. These are regulations and mandates. They haven't had proper democratic scrutiny, and they are illegal and immoral. So those are the two words I think we could maybe end on. And in my personal opinion, not to stand up against them is equally immoral. Once you know the truth, you can't unsee it. So that's.
Yep. I think that's a pretty good point to leave it. And thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure, Mark. Thank you for having me.
This is just for fun. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations. I'm picking up vibrations.